police.
And I'm Tom. As Oscar Wilde once said,
ultimately the bond of all companionship, whether in marriage or in friendship, is conversation.
Welcome to our husband-wife podcast, The Elliott Exchange. What could possibly go wrong?
Find out with us by tapping the follow or subscribe button on The Elliott Exchange, wherever you get your podcast.
Just a warning, this episode contains some graphic material that listeners may find confronting.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Salinger-Morris. It's Monday, May 29th. We finally know what happened in the missing persons investigation that captured a nation. Melissa Caddick, the fraudster who stole $23 million from her closest family and friends, is dead. So said the deputy state coroner, who handed down her report last week. But how did she come to this finding? Until now, all we knew was that Caddick's right foot had washed up on the shores of a remote beach. This was shortly after she went missing nearly 2.5 years ago. Today, investigative reporter Kate McClymont on what we now know and what we'll never know about what happened to Melissa Caddick. Kate, last week, the coronial inquest into Melissa Caddick's suspected death delivered its outcome. So you were in court that day. Can you tell us what were the main findings? There was so much anticipation leading up to that day.
Well, look, there was great anticipation out at Lidcombe Coroner's Court to see whether the coroner actually felt she had enough evidence to declare that Melissa Caddick was dead. And during her handing down her findings, she said that although you can survive with your foot cut off, she was of the opinion that Melissa Caddick was dead.
I have concluded that Melissa Caddick is deceased.
However, she said that she was unable to determine how, when and why she died.
A more problematical issue is whether the evidence is sufficient to enable a positive finding as to how she died and when and where this happened.
And so all those things will remain a mystery. But she was particularly harsh in her criticism of Anthony Coletti.
He had some awareness of Ms. Caddick's movements, but he chose not to disclose it.
There was no indication, I must say, that Coletti was in any way involved in harming his wife. It was more that those crucial hours, police and the coroner felt he knew more about his wife's disappearance than he was letting on. One of the reasons the coroner gave for being satisfied that Melissa Caddick was dead was not only had there been no credible sightings, she talked about the number of fanciful theories that had been proposed. But, her credit cards hadn't been touched, her bank accounts hadn't been used. But the most crucial thing she mentioned was the complete love and devotion Melissa Caddick had for her teenage son, and that she found it absolutely impossible and incomprehensible that if she was alive over the last 2.5 years, she would have contacted her son.
So obviously that's the major finding that the coroner has announced, that Melissa Caddick is dead. Are there any other sort of key findings that we should know about?
She also took Anthony Coletti and his mother-in-law, Barbara Grimley, to task for making, really quite extraordinary allegations that during the course of the raid on Melissa Caddick's property, which was executed by the corporate watchdog ASIC and assisted by federal police, that the ASIC investigators had tortured and were so inhumane towards Melissa Caddick that was a contribution towards her death. So during the inquest, we had videos played, we heard evidence, and there was just not one skerrick of evidence to support that theory.
That's interesting. I did want to backtrack just one moment to the really massive finding that she is dead. How did the coroner even come to the conclusion that she is dead? Like you said, you'd been told before by pathologists that you can survive without a foot. It's highly likely that means someone is dead, but it's not proof. So did the coroner explain that?
Yes. So a crucial piece of this story was the washing up of Melissa Caddick's right running shoe with her partial remains inside on a remote beach, some 450 kilometres south of Sydney, 100 days after she disappeared. Now, the coroner said, look, the DNA in the shoe is definitely that of Melissa Caddick. But she took us to the reports of forensic pathologists who said that, the foot had suffered extensive decomposition, and, that was likely to have been the result of predation by birds and marine organisms. And the decomposition suggested it had been in the water for a prolonged period of time. But because of the loss of the amount of soft tissue, the pathologist couldn't determine how the foot had become separated from the body. And it was interesting that an orthopaedic surgeon also gave evidence, and he said that it's unlikely that a person with no medical training would be able to cut off their own foot just because of shock and blood loss. It would be difficult to survive. It is possible, but he said that from his examination, it looked more to him as though blunt force trauma rather than sharp force trauma, i.e. a knife or something like that, had caused the foot fractures. There were fractures in the bones of the foot that remained. But even so, he said that he couldn't tell whether those fractures had occurred before or after the foot had separated from Melissa Caddick's body.
Right. And so my understanding from your previous reports on this is that because they found those fractures, they still couldn't conclude whether she had intentionally jumped from a great height or if she was intentionally pushed or if she perhaps fell accidentally. So do you think the manner of Melissa Caddick's death will always remain a mystery?
Look, I think it will, unless more information comes to light. And as the coroner said, inquests provide a sense of peace. It doesn't take the grief away, but being able to tell families how something happened. And she apologised and said, in this case, unfortunately, I just cannot provide you with that sense of peace because we just don't know from the evidence how Melissa Caddick came to die.
So with regards to Melissa Caddick's victims, because there is this ongoing legal battle over the $23 million that she stole from her clients, they thought that she was investing their money in the share market. And I wonder, how do you think the news of this inquest will land with them?
I guess in some ways, the loss of their money is what is crucial to them. They've already been betrayed and let down. And in her findings, Deputy State Coroner made reference to some neighbours of Melissa Caddick's parents. They were an elderly couple, and she described them as being flabbergasted when they discovered the loss of their superannuation funds was close to $600,000. And they said, it wasn't like her, we loved her. And then, one of the couples said, I sold my business as I was under the impression my money was safe, and I retired in 2017. To rub more salt in the wound, she has also stolen my mother's money, wife's, mother-in-law, son, brother and sister, wiping out 3 generations of my family's savings. And I think it's hard to grasp the financial devastation that so many of these people have suffered. And again, these are her family and friends. These are people who trusted her implicitly.
Yeah. It's so hard to take in. And finally, Kate, I wanted to ask you, about your own feelings on this, because you broke this massive story. You've been covering it for years. You've spoken to everyone, loved ones and, friends and forensic pathologists and doctors and financial experts. You've gone through Christmas cards that Melissa Caddick's parents sent to her. So how does it feel for you to have this end? How do you personally reflect on this outcome?
Look, in some ways, it provides a partial answer, in at least that the coroner has determined that she is deceased. But I guess for the victims, the matter rolls on. For instance, over the last year and a half, we've seen the sale of the Dover Heights home, the auction of her jewellery and her clothes and her cars. But still, the fight goes on between basically the liquidators and other investors and Melissa Caddick's parents, Barb and Grimley, over one of the last key assets in Melissa Caddick's estate, and that is an Edgecliff penthouse worth up to $4.5 million. And so until that is decided, I think we won't quite see the end of the matter. And it looks like out-of-pocket investors may receive about 36 cents in the dollar return from the money that they stole. And so until that's actually signed, sealed and delivered, there won't be real closure.
Well, Kate, I think we are all thankful that you've covered this so diligently over the years, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you about this.
Well, lovely speaking to you too, Samantha.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Hannah Mills-Turbot. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.
G'day, it's Jimmy Bartell.
And Bruce Eva. Our podcast, Yesterday's Heroes, covers all sports.
Honestly, what are you bringing to the table, Beaver?
The knowledge.
Let's test it. How many test wickets did Uak Lemmagrath take?
563.
How many laps around Mount Panorama?
I told you this the other week, 161.
As usual, I wasn't listening to you. Who's winning the Ashes?
Well, that's up to us to debate.
No debate. We'll absolutely romp it in, so listen to me for your tips.
And to me to sound sports smart.
Well, listen to both of us. Subscribe to Yesterday's Heroes wherever you get your podcasts.
New episodes every Thursday, thanks to PointsBet.